In terms of death and devastation, not many events in the world could match An Lushan's rebellion, or as it's known in China, An-Shi Rebellion, because it was a two-man job between An Lushan and his deputy Shi Siming. In this episode, we are going to talk about the ethnic dimension of this disaster and some of the rarely mentioned gruesome incidents surrounding it. In the reign of Emperor Tang Xuanzong, the Tang Dynasty reached the height of its golden age. The empire was powerful, prosperous, influential, and cosmopolitan. As I've discussed in the previous episode, it hosted a diverse variety of people, traders, and religion, from places as far west as Persia and Arabia to the Near East of Korea and Japan. Hiding underneath this veneer of utopian cultural melting pot, however, was tightly strung tension between the different ethnicities that made up Tang Dynasty China. The Turkic peoples were probably the most numerous non-Han Chinese ethnic group in the Tang Dynasty. Both the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganate had at one time been vassals of the Tang Dynasty. The Turks made up a significant amount of the Tang fighting force as the empire expanded deep into Central Asia. In return, their loyalty and services were richly rewarded. But some of the Turks did not look too kindly to the wealth of gold offered. The Orkhon inscription, which was erected in the 8th century before An Lushan's rebellion, already claimed that the fortune offered by the Tang Empire was a corrupting influence to the good and stout Turkic people. Tang Taizong, the co-founder of the Tang Dynasty and its second emperor, ruled the Chinese people as the Son of Heaven and the Turks as the Han of Heaven. Well, he at least ruled them according to their term. But the emperors after him became more and more culturally distant, as they engaged in the High Tang culture and preoccupied themselves with palace intrigues. Sure, the Tang Dynasty might be a cosmopolitan empire, but if you look at it from the other people's perspective, melting pot or Chinese, it is still a corruption of their people's culture. One person who thrived in this corruption is your good old An Lushan. An Lushan's parentage is unclear. His father is commonly believed to be Sogdian, and according to official Chinese history, his mother was a Turkic shaman. During his youth, he was known to be cruel and cunning. He knew 6 non-Chinese languages and worked as interpreter in the frontier markets. One day, in 732, he was caught stealing sheep, and he managed to talk his way out of the execution by joining the army. This is also where he met his friend Shi Siming. This career change turned out to be a boon for An Lushan. He rose through the ranks quickly as he fought against the Khitan and Xi people. Best of all, he lost some weight. The Chinese official histories are pretty savage. They just love to keep mentioning how fat he was. When he was eventually granted an audience with the emperor, he played his cards really well. How? By ignoring the crown prince. Nah, he didn't show him any respect. When asked why he didn't, he pulled out his barbarian card, saying that he didn't understand what a crown prince was, since he was just a simple barbarian. This actually was a power move. The Tang court at the time was rife with factionalism, and the 3 most prominent factions were the Crown Prince Li Heng's faction, the Chancellor Li Lingfu's faction, and Yang Guifei's relatives. Consort Yang was considered to be one of the 4 great beauties of ancient China, and she was also the emperor's most favorite concubine, so he knew who to suck up to. An Lushan asked her to be his adoptive mother. Keep in mind that at the time, she was in her mid-20s, around 16 years younger than him. Yet, his request was granted. He then gave his greetings to her first, before the emperor, saying that it was his people's custom to greet the mother first before the father. Since this performance pleased her, the emperor was pleased as well, and from then on, both of them showed him plenty of favors. Li Lingfu, on the other hand, had other plans for An Lushan. As chancellor, he was always wary of other Han Chinese who would compete for his position. And one common way to rise up to his position is to be a commander in the frontier. So, to prevent competition, he assigned non-Han Chinese generals to many of these posts, because they usually don't get to be promoted to his ministerial position, or just because most of them are not interested in court position. But, against all expectation, An Lushan was thriving amid the palace intrigue, playing the role of a foolish barbarian general. He was given treasures and luxurious mansion, and to him it was all worth it, even if he had to participate in Yang Guifei's elaborate joke of having him appear in court wearing nothing but baby's wrapping. Eventually, however, he made some powerful enemies. Li Lingfu, who he had good relationship with, died in 753, and Yang Guozong, the cousin of Yang Guifei, became the new chancellor. He hated An Lushan and tried to get rid of him by accusing him of plotting rebellions. Failing to do so, he went on to frame and execute An Lushan's subordinates one by one, and he kept on the pressure, gaslighting the emperor. The crown prince, who was initially skeptical, was then convinced. An Lushan, seeing that the emperor was already in his 70s, became worried that once his protector was gone, all the different factions would finally close in on him. He wanted to rebel, they say? Well, he is tired of pretending that he didn't want to. So in 755, he established his own dynasty, the Yin dynasty, and launched the rebellion. An Lushan had the confidence to win because he commanded the battle-hardened frontier soldiers. Central China and the area near the capital were lacking in soldiers. They had started to implement the Jian system to recruit volunteer professional soldiers, but it was still in the early stages of the policy, so they were no match for An Lushan's force, and Luoyang, the second capital, was quickly conquered. To make things worse, a series of infighting and palace intrigue prevented the Tang army to mount an effective defense. Thus, the frontier soldiers from the western region was recalled, led by Guo Xianzi, a general of Goguryeo ancestry. He and General Feng Changqing put up a strong defense at Tong Pass, but due to them offending a eunuch, false reports were made against them and they were executed. Then Yang Guozong appointed a new general, Ge Suhan, An Lushan's rival, who was of Turkic origin, but he was defeated too. As the rebels approached Chang'an, the emperor and the crown prince fled and went separate ways. Along the way, the emperor's entourage blamed the disaster on the Yang family and demanded their death or they will mutiny. So the emperor had no choice but to execute Yang Guozong and sentence his favorite concubine death by strangulation. The crown prince then declared himself the new emperor, Suzong, and his father, Xuanzong, just accepted his claim and became a retired emperor. The devastation caused by this rebellion that lasted for 8 years was horrific. Census figures before the rebellion showed that China had around 52 million people. The census after the rebellion only accounted for 16.9 million. This huge drop in number is mostly attributed to the changes in the census-taking methodology. It is unlikely that 35 million people, 2/3 of the population, was killed during this period. Not all deaths were caused by the An Lushan side either. A significant part can be attributed to the chaos caused by the lack of central leadership that led to other rebellions and horror stories to spring from all across China. In the Battle of Suiyang, Tang defenders were trapped by An Lushan's army for months. Despite running out of provisions, they continued their resistance and even resorted to eating their own citizens. They started with the dead, then followed by the old and young before finally being overrun. Was the sacrifice worth it? In the same year, another prince, Li Ling, used the chaos to try to establish himself in southern China. A civil war almost broke out until he was killed by the magistrate. In 758, Arab and Persian raiders hit Guangzhou, and in 760, when a local official in the wealthy trading city of Yangzhou rebelled, the Tang general who suppressed the rebellion used the opportunity to rob and massacre the local Arab and Persian population. Even though there were Han and non-Han Chinese fighting on both sides, this animosity between the Chinese population and the foreigners they blamed for the rebellion was at an all-time high. This is further exacerbated when the new emperor Suzong sought assistance from the Uyghur Khaganate. To secure their alliance, he signed an unequal trade deal, having to pay exorbitant amount of silk for their few horses, and also the privilege to loot Luoyang and several Chinese cities after their recapture. As for the rebellion itself, it successively imploded with the assassination of An Lushan in 757 by his own disgruntled subordinates who he abused. He was then replaced by his son, An-Shi, and like clockwork, every 2 years the new leader was usurped. An-Shi was killed and replaced by An Lushan's deputy, Si Siming, and he himself was taken out by his son, Si Chaoyi. One of the rebel generals, Guo Juren, refused Si Chaoyi's command and went on to carve his own domain in Fanyang by massacring the Sogdian population there, including their children, possibly to wipe out An Lushan's supporters. Eventually, the rebellion ended in 763, and so did the golden age of Tang Dynasty and its dream of a cosmopolitan empire. Never again shall the Tang Dynasty reach the same height as before. On the next episode, we are going to look at ZHANG Guogang, a Korean expat in post-rebellion Tang Dynasty China who returned to Korea and became a god. Be sure to subscribe so that you won't miss it. And if you want to support us, come to Patreon and be our bro. Until next time, stay cool, my bros.